There was a time where Chevy made the C8 Corvette and then decided to double the price and wait a year and a half to really make that car work. And then Nissan decided to take that same exact idea and move it over into a new car, a car that so many people wanted like 5 years ago, a car that was supposed to come out at $50,000 and for some reason or another is now twice the price because dealers just want to do that. A car that came with a twin turbo, 400 horsepower, 350 foot-pounds of torque, and a car that was going to be the next best generation of the Z name. It's like a first edition Charizard with the car behind me because nobody can seem to get their hands on it, but we did. This one's got 1,000 miles and we're gonna be teaching you how to modify one, even if you're probably not gonna own one for a few years. So we're here at US Air where we're gonna be doing exactly that, driving around the track and teaching you how to modify a Nissan Z. US Air is a beautiful place, which is why we're here testing tires, testing cars, modifying them on the spot, and of course letting you know that when you are looking to pick up parts, you can buy them over at Martini Works because we want to test the parts so that when they arrive at your door, you don't feel like you're getting duped by silly marketing. So with that said, if you guys are ever interested in picking a car for us to do content on, test out, or build, be sure to let us know in the comment section below. And of course, if you're in the area, check out US Air. It's one of my favorite tracks. It's fantastic for drifting, for autocross, for everything in between, and it even has a very wicked go-kart layout. So with that being said, let's talk about the Nissan Z. The 2023 Nissan Z, the 400Z, the RZ34 is a true two-seater car. There's no back seats in here. It's a 400 horsepower, 350 foot-pounds of torque car, and it took Nissan a minute to come out with this car. It took them even longer to get it into production. But what I really love about the Z above all else is that it takes after pretty much the tried and true recipe of what Nissan loves to make. No back seats, manual gearbox to decide how much you want to smile, and just the right amount of power going to the rear wheels where it's fun for pretty much every type of motorsport. You have to remember, this comes after 7 years of development of the Nissan 350Z, 13 years of development with the Nissan 370Z, and even though it's easy to bag on because nobody can seem to get the cars, it is another really successful Z lineup car just from only driving it for 1,000 miles. Now let's address the elephant in the room. The fact that these cars are dang near impossible to get, and on top of that, you've got haters saying, well, this car is just a rebadged 370Z, and you gotta get that out of your head. That is totally not true. Sure, it has some parts and pieces from the 370Z. It's got pieces from not even the 370Z, just other cars from the Nissan lineup. But that doesn't change the fact that this car is still an absolute blast. And you have to remember, all sports cars take parts and bits and pieces from other cars. Toyota couldn't make a sports car at the right price point, which is why they hired BMW with the Supra. So I want you to get that out of your head if you're looking at one of these cars, because this is an excellent car. The real Achilles heel on these cars is the price point, and that's what makes these cars so difficult to actually pick up, because you're not looking at a $50,000 sports car, you're looking at a $90,000 sports car, which adds a few more question marks on if the car is actually worth picking up. But the good old Midwest boys are here to help you, because this car is our Nissan Z from Martini Works, and we're gonna be building it so that you can know if it's actually worth it or not. Because we've already been talking to Chris Forsberg, who took his Z to Willow Springs. We've already been chatting with Dustin Williams in 2022 at SEMA about his Nissan Z experience, and we've been lurking in the shadows of TJ Hunt's comment section from when he built his Nissan Z too. So how do you own one of these cars? Well, I think it's gonna require a little bit of help from your local dealership. But how do you modify one of these? Well, that's where we come into it. So buckle up, we're gonna teach you just how to modify one of these really yellow, really odd looking, frontish bumper looking cars that I still believe is gonna be another Nissan classic. So the car gets a 10 out of 10 because it already has the recipe for being the perfect modified car. Rear-wheel drive, twin turbo, all the goodies, manual gearbox. But it gets -3 points because the cooling is already sounding to be an issue with these cars from the sources that we've talked to. Now, on top of that, you got another -2 points because these cars and a lot of new cars feature a rev hang issue. It's just this weird feeling of disconnection when you shift in these cars, and we've experienced it ourselves. But before you go into anything else, before you go into wheels and tires, before you go into suspension, before you go into the tune zone, you gotta talk about cooling, because cooling is still an issue on these twin turbo cars, and Infiniti couldn't fix it, and Nissan wasn't any better. The good news is there's a couple key components that I'd recommend from AMS that are gonna really help improve the longevity of this car and the modifications that you can do to it. Starting off with the AMS heat exchanger, it's gonna double the thickness of the heat exchanger on this car by itself. It's right around $1,000, but it's one of the best and most key performance improvements you can do on this platform. Now, with a lot of turbocharged cars, everybody always thinks you're gonna get all the front mount intercooler space cooling down here, and that's not the case with the Nissan Z, and it's certainly not the case with a lot of new turbocharged cars. You see, the Nissan Z uses a really fancy coolant system, like an air to water coolant system, for keeping everything down in terms of temp. The problem is it doesn't do a great job with consistent track performance, so you get a ton of heat soak on these cars. When you go into the heat exchanger from AMS, you're actually going to get double the amount of coolant that can be stored in the heat exchanger, and on top of that, it's just a little bit better made. It's gonna keep things more stable for longer track periods of time, which means you don't have to suffer from heat stroke after. Your car may be having heat stroke, you might be having heat soak issues. That is gonna fix a good chunk of it. And officially, the car does suffer from heat soak in some of the warmer regions of the country, which is why we're talking about the cooling. Up here, not so much, but down in California, absolutely. There's another thing that AMS offers called a differential cooling kit. It actually keeps the differential about 60 degrees cooler once the entire car is warmed up, which can actually increase the longevity of your clutch packs and all sorts of goodness over there. That's the thing with these cars. If you're down south, we recommend like the order of modification to start with cooling, then intake, exhaust, tune, wheels and tires, and then coilovers. If you can really enjoy this car in its stock format, you'll learn to love it in its modified format. Now, once you get past that, you do have to realize that almost everything on this godforsaken car is $1,000. If you want race cats, it's $1,000. If you want a differential cooling kit, it's $1,000. If you want the AMS heat exchanger kit, that's $1,000. If you want BC Racing coilovers, it's $1,000. Everything on this car is $1,000. Nothing is cheap because the car is still new. So if you're looking to save money, you're really gonna wanna look to getting like quality budget parts versus just saving up to try and spend $20,000 on what will ultimately be a 500 horsepower car. Now for catback exhausts, there are a few out there, and unfortunately I haven't personally found any that I've loved yet to throw on this car, which is making me almost want to build my own. But what I can say, if you don't want to wait, I almost want to say Borla has been one of the best sounding exhausts I've heard on this car. Of course you have HKS, you do have some other options out there like Nvidia and all those guys and gals, but for some reason these cars still suffer from that very interesting exhaust note where if you don't do it right, they kind of sound really crappy. So remember, when you're going into the exhaust game, especially with the Nissan Z, keep that resonator conversation in mind, just like you did with a 370 or 350Z, because these engines, they do just sound a little raspy. Now the good news is if you fix the cooling issues, if you live in one of those states, I can say the biggest two things are honestly suspension and cooling with this car, which BC Racing already makes the BR series for this car for coilovers, which we're gonna be throwing on this car almost immediately once we put our baseline down. So if you're not subscribed, be sure to do that next. Now with the tires, we don't have a necessarily bad problem with the Bridgestone Potenzas that are on it, but for us, we've seen a lot more performance come out of the Continental DWS 06 Plus, and we're gonna be testing it directly against the Michelin Pilot Sport 4S as well. We would recommend going with a little bit more of a track-oriented tire for this car. We think it's gonna wake it up a lot because we're noticing a lot of sloshing in the way the driving feels around the track. We think that has a lot to do with the suspension, but the tires are obviously not helping it as well. Now, the wheels are actually awesome in their stock format, which sucks when I start talking about swapping them out. These ones are on the performance, they're forged, they're from Rays, so they're pretty damn cool. Now, what I can say, I've seen people like TJ Hunt throw TEs on this thing. Honestly, I'm not a huge fan of going down in size on this car. These are 19, so we'd recommend sticking with a 19 or even going up to a 20-inch if you're comfortable with that. Z cars love square setups. We've noticed a lot of people run 19 by 9.5 plus 15s. It'll get you a nice flush look. Sometimes it'll tuck a little bit. If you want to go into a staggered setup, we've also seen people go into a 9.5 front with like a plus, I almost want to say 15 front, and a 19 by 10.5 plus 29 rear. Unfortunately, Unfortunately, the car's not wide enough to just use the GTR staggered fitment that you'll see a lot of JDM brands run. So with this one, we're kind of stuck waiting for a company to make a wheel for this car or waiting for somebody to be comfortable with throwing spacers on it. So if you do want to change the wheels and tires, which you can, I totally get it. If you want to go with something maybe just more of like a rep JDM style, Kansei obviously has options. If you want something that's a little bit more performance, Koenig's gonna have some really good options for you too, but I do think that that might date the look of this vehicle a little bit. And of course, if you want to be one of the cool real wheel boys in the gang, you can do that as well, but you're pretty much stuck with like ZR10s, Working Motion 2-pieces, and sometimes the Advans if they're in stock. But remember, square setups are gonna probably be easier to jump into in the 19s. Just don't go with the conservative weird stuff that other people are recommending just because it's in stock. Now, should the Nissan Z actually come down to real world prices, this car is incredibly fun. The only thing that it's truly missing, the only thing that's truly screwing with this car is the fact that you can't get it. Because once you throw some simple bolt-ons onto this car, once you change out the GT feeling suspension to some decent coilovers, once the fact you change out the intake and the exhaust, you get a little extra power, you throw a tune on it, you're gonna be at 525 wheel horsepower right out of the gate, and that's going to make you competitive against the B58 heavyweight champion that is the Mark V Supra right now. And sure, it's coming out with a 6-speed manual too, which is definitely an awesome comparison, but Nissan has some really cool things going for it too. I've always loved the way that these cars feel, even though sometimes they need a little bit of help on the tuner and modification side. And I think once you take that into consideration, and once you take the chance to really accept the fact that you're gonna be spending 10 grand on this car in parts just right out of the gate if you wanna make it do something else outside of its stock form, we think it's a winner. But you do need to pump your brakes in thinking that you're gonna make a 9-second quarter-mile drag car out of these cars. Because while I do think that's super cool that AMS is doing that, the car is meant to be turned and driven and run out onto the track. And I'm hopeful that we get to spend some time out on a track like this, setting our baselines with the Nissan Z, and then comparing it with maybe the heavyweight champion, which would be the Toyota Supra. So how do you modify a Nissan Z? Well, that's actually pretty easy. First things first, you buy one. Then once you get through that, you have to spend about 10 grand in modifications to make sure the thing stays cool, feels right on a track, and of course, can actually sound the part. But you do end up getting something that's right around 525 wheel horsepower to 550 wheel horsepower, which is actually pretty good. It's not too bad. But the real question is buying a Nissan Z actually worth it? And the answer to that is, well, it depends on what you want. You guys let us know in the comment section below. And of course, if you are looking to modify your vehicle for no matter what purpose, wheels, tires, suspension, performance stuff, or anything in between, be sure to check out martiniworks.com. And of course, if you need inspiration, go check out our build thread so that you can learn how to build your car from people who already built it. I'm Alex on Martini with 2 underscores on Instagram. We will see you later. Adios.